Hard disk failures are not that common, but they do occur. This is because even now, most hard disks out there are genuine hard disks rather than SSDs and contain moving parts. Sometimes the failure can be logical, which can probably be recovered with some sort of disk utility, or otherwise it can be a mechanical failure, which is probably not recoverable. There are electronics in hard disks which can fail, and then you can have a firmware problem on a device. The device, if it's a mechanical hard disk, may contain bad sectors, which may contain critical information, such as metadata on the disk, which means that the disk is inaccessible. If you suffer a single disk failure in a mirrored volume, you can use the following procedure to recover. Shut down your computer if needed. Some hard disks can be hot swapped, others can't. Install a replacement disk that's at least as big as the failed disk. Restart your computer if necessary and open disk management. Right-click the mirror on the missing or offline disk and then click Remove Mirror. Right-click the volume to be remirrored and click Add Mirror. So effectively, you remove the mirror and add a new mirror. If you experience a failure of a disk in a storage space, use the following procedure to recover. If required, shut down your computer. Again, your disks may be hot swappable. Install a replacement disk that's at least as big as the failed unit. Open Manage Storage Spaces. Click the Change Settings button. Add the new disk to the storage pool. Storage Spaces automatically repairs the mirror. Then remove the failed drive from the pool. One of the more common scenarios for troubleshooting storage is when a user thinks they should have access to a resource but doesn't have access. There are a number of reasons why that might occur. First of all, the user doesn't have the correct rights. Secondly, there may be security options that are getting in the way. Security options are things like the ability to log on locally or to change a password. So user account control options are also security options. These aren't file permissions, nor are user rights file permissions. They're the abilities to do things, to perform management functions. So it may be that the issue is to do with what a user can do rather than what a user can access. File and folder permissions can certainly be the cause. It may simply be a question of the user having been put in an incorrect group, and the group having the permissions and the user not having the permissions. Shared folder permissions can also introduce complexities because, as we discussed earlier, you have to pass through the shared folder to get to the file and folder permissions underneath. So change the shared folder permissions to be everyone full control, and then you need only look at the file and folder permissions on NTFS or REFS. Group memberships. If you've been following administrative best practice, you'll only ever assign permissions to groups rather than to users. Makes it easier for you. If a user moves department, you move them into a different group, and that changes their file permissions without you having to worry about any explicit permissions that you might have assigned to that individual. Dynamic access control is probably outside the scope of this course. It's quite a complicated server-side component to set up. But in essence, it means that a user makes a claim about who they are, what abilities they have, what groups they belong to. And those conditions, as a result of their claims, determine whether or not they can access a resource. So it might be that they have to physically be at a particular address using a particular computer or a member of a group or all of those things to be able to gain access. Unlike file and folder permissions, which are in essence quite static, dynamic access control by its name is dynamic, so a user's conditions will change as they move between computers, or the time of day changes, or other aspects of how they're interacting with the system aren't the same. So consequently, you need to look quite carefully if you implement dynamic access control to ensure that users' conditions are met. It may simply be that a resource is offline or otherwise unavailable. It's a good idea to encrypt whole drives with BitLocker, but what happens if you lose the ability to access the BitLocker drive and you need to recover the drive? If you encrypt a device with BitLocker while using a Microsoft account, you can specify that BitLocker saves the recovery key up to OneDrive. That means you can always recover a BitLocker encrypted drive so long as you can access OneDrive. In this situation, use the following procedure. Open a web browser, navigate to onedrive.live.com/recovery key, sign in with your Microsoft account, and access your recovery keys.